Hey, William here, and back with another video. So today I'm going to talk to you about something called RAG. What is RAG? So say you have a question for a LLM and you want to provide a little bit more information about your business or just about anything else, right? So here I've got this case where I want to talk about my business and I want to spend a few hours today working on next steps, right? I want to launch a pipeline for leads. So I found this guide off Reddit talking about cold email, cold call. How can I apply that to my business plan, the details, my services, all that? Obviously, I could copy and paste. I could spend some time writing. However, pretty soon, if you're spending a lot of time writing this stuff, you want an easier way for the AI to fundamentally understand some of this information, right? So that's where RAG comes in. RAG is a way to provide this information every time you hit enter, every time you send a new message to the AI. It's going to find relevant stuff about your business and it's going to feed that in as additional context. So you can see an example being here, based on my business stage, and then I'm providing the context here. I want to spend a few hours today working on next steps following this guide. And you can see that it's provided a relatively general, granted in this case, talking about, LinkedIn, for example. Here's another example, what's my target market? And you can see this is really where it's applying itself. Yeah. So it's talking immediately about medium to large size B2B businesses, talking about lead qualification, talking about meta ads. So this is exactly my business, right? So how does it know how to do this? So that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do today. And the first thing I'm going to show you is like how I actually gave it this information. So I literally just have a Google Drive folder. And within that folder is a bunch of general information. You can see business plan. If I open this up, you can see, some LLM generated content, talking about market trends, talking about, target audience, et cetera, right? But once I'm happy with it, obviously I want to keep using it, right? So that's why I'm putting it in this Google Drive, and then I'm applying it to the rest of my AI searches. So how did I do this? I used something called Llama Index, which is just another framework. There are many frameworks to use RAG with your AI system. A key component was the fact that I did want to use Google Drive. And the second thing was that I wanted to use something called Continue. Continue.dev is just I guess a wrapper around a bunch of AIs. So if you're like me and you like to switch between, Google Gemini, OpenAI, you want to switch between Claude, then, this makes it really easy and it's directly in VS Code, which, being me, I'm in quite often anyway. So it makes sense that I want something pretty close to that. So the way that I did that, as I said, was with Llama Index. Now there is a guide which I did follow, which gives you the initial setup, though I did have to adapt it a little bit to make it work with Continue. So I will provide you the entire code that you can pretty much just plug and play, but I will just briefly run you through the steps on how to set this up yourself. So the first thing I would recommend is just reading over this kind of guide, which does go into detail about how it works in general. Don't worry, you don't necessarily need to understand how this works if you're not a coder, because as I said, I did provide all that code to you. But this goes into detail about setting up the packages. The only thing you actually do need to know is setting up the Redis vector store. Now, this is a database which does actually hold that data, that, like I said, that information about your business, and it will tell you how to do that. So it's actually really easy to do. The only thing you need to do is set up Docker on your computer. Okay, so depending on what kind of computer you have, if you have a Mac, you can just go to Docker and download it for Mac and set it up. And once you do that, all you need to do is set it up on your computer and run this in the terminal essentially. So just open up terminal and then you can run this command and that will actually set up a Docker container, which is like an enclosed container, which has this Redis stack, which then we can connect to and add data to quite easily. And that's just one line of code that you enter into your terminal, and then that gets that set up, that database, and we'll be good to go in terms of that database. So once that's done, the second thing we need to do is set up the Google side of things. And this, again, is pretty easy to do. There's another link that you need here, which I will provide, but it just goes into detail about setting up the credentials. Pretty much what you just need to do is go to console.cloud.google.com, set up a project. once you're in the project, you need to enable the Drive API, which you can just select here and then click enable. Again, very easy to do. Then you go into credentials like it says in this guide, and you need to basically create a new client ID and set up the redirect URIs and set up a consent screen. So I won't go into detail how to do that, but you just need to follow this guide. Now, the only change on this guide that I've made in terms of the code implementation that I'm using is changing this URI. So you can see here when I go and edit the client that I've changed the URI slightly. So you can copy this one and paste it in if you want to use that particular code as is. Then you just need to add this redirect URI instead of the one that's in the guide. Other than that, should work just fine. Once you've set it up, you just need to download that and you need to paste it into your code. Okay, so we can see the code here and it's again quite easy to use. So in the env example, this will show you the variables that you need to put in, including the API key, including the folder ID, including the redirect URI, including the Redis URL and the chunk size. Okay, so I'll briefly go over each of those things. This is the URI that we put in that I just spoke about. The folder ID is the drive ID of the folder that you want to use. Okay, so that's what this is here. You just literally need to copy after that first or that last slash, copy that code and then put it in here. And as long as you've set it up on the same account, so you want to make sure obviously that you're using the same account that you're using in here. Okay, so they obviously have access to each other, and that means you're going to have access to that folder. Makes sense, right? So you can either do that, or alternatively, you can just share it with the account, and then that also works. Okay, so that's what that folder ID is. The Google API key is because I'm using Gemini to generate the embeddings. Now, the embeddings are essentially the code that the AI is using to figure out what text is matching. So when you ask it a question like, what is my business name? What is my target audience? It figures out based on those embeddings, what matches in terms of the database. So you will need to set up a API key. So to do that, we just need to go to aistudio.google.com, set it up. You got to connect billing. Okay, you got to connect your credit card. It's not going to be a lot of money, but you do need to connect a credit card in order to get a API key. Okay, so once you do that, you just create the key and then you can paste it in there. Next thing we need is the Redis URL. So this is the Docker container that we set up previously. And to figure out what that URL is going to be, you just need to, in your terminal, so if you're in VS Code, you can just do it like that. You can do Control Tilde, and then that's going to open up the terminal. Otherwise, you can, obviously go to terminal and then do it that way, right? So you can see here, if I do Docker PS, that's going to show you the different Docker containers that are coming up. And we need to actually inspect the Docker container. So you can go Docker inspect and then Redis stack. And that's going to show us the actual IP address of that Docker container. Okay, we do need that. So we can see that right here, the IP address. What we'll do is just replace that here before the colon and then the port. Okay, so we just need to add that there. And then finally, the chunk size is going to be how much text you want to put in the embedding. Okay, so this is actually a very important setting. And I'm going to explain to you exactly what this does. So this website visualizes the chunk size and how it changes how embeddings are created. So like I said, embedding is going to be that vector storage of essentially meaning, text, content, whatever. And it's the chunk size is how much text is going to be in one embedding or one chunk at a time. So depending on the type of content you have, this will change a lot. Okay, so for me, I found that a good chunk size that balanced, the speed at which I could start the application up, as well as actually knowing what's going on, something around like 350. And you can visualize what that actually does. So if I set it to 350 now, you can see that it's including, a couple of sentences, right? And if you're talking about business stuff, then, obviously you're not going to have a full understanding with a couple of sentences, but you got to think about it in the mind of the computer that it's combining, or I guess it's sifting through sentences to figure out what's matching your question. So if you ask it, what is my business name? What's my target audience? Then it's going to find, a couple of sentences which has, my target audience is X, right? So if you have a massive chunk size, then it's going to find a match and then it's going to feed in all that data, okay? Which could be good, right? Depending on what it is, but if you have a lot of data in your question that is unrelated, then it's going to have a trickier time actually figuring out what's relevant to your question. You're actually more likely to get a worse answer, right? Whereas if you have too little data and it only matches a couple of words, then you're not providing it any good information that you're actually adding to your question, right? So you need to find a good middle ground, and you can play with this. Obviously it's pretty easy to change. And I found 350 at the moment seems to be working pretty well, right? The default's, a bit higher than that. You can go up to 512 and it is going to be much faster because the larger the chunk, the less it has to put in. If you go too small, I just found that it took ages to start up and it didn't work that well. So 350 was a good middle ground for me. Okay. So once you've set that up and you've put in all those keys, so how do we get this started up? So obviously I already went into detail how you fill out that env file. You need to rename that and set it to just .env, and then that's going to be ready to go. You need to paste in that credentials.json that we downloaded from here. You need to download it, paste it in, and make sure that's renamed to credentials.json. And the final thing is you need to ensure that you've installed all the dependencies for the Python file, okay? So the cleanest way that I found that you could do that is obviously you need to have Python installed. So that's the first thing. You need to go and download Python, install it for whatever operating system that you have, and the latest release should work fine, and you should be good to go in that regard. The next thing is you need to make sure, you don't have to, but it is highly recommended, that you're using a VENV environment. Okay, so that's a virtual environment for Python, which means that if you're running a whole bunch of different projects, the dependencies in Python are always going to be different, right? And if you're downloading different dependencies, that means that one time one script is going to work and one isn't going to work. So a virtual environment means that you have all the dependencies for a Python file in this folder, and it only runs those dependencies, and it means that it's just going to work. You're not going to be messing around with it each time, right? So if you're in VS Code, and obviously that's the way that I recommend that you do it, then you always want to make sure that you've got the Python extensions installed, Python debugger, and the Python environment manager. Okay, so once you've done that, you can select environment. Okay, so Python select interpreter, and you create a virtual environment, and then you just create that virtual environment in the folder. Okay, so in the folder, you create the virtual environment, v.env, and then you're good to go. Okay, it should load up that environment. If it doesn't, then you just select interpreter, it should appear, or you select that interpreter path, and you can see here that it's picking up this folder here, right? So it's opening that Python file. That's what you want to do, okay? And once it's loaded, the way that you know that it is loaded will be that you've got this little symbol here, okay? The next thing that you want to do is make sure that you have screen installed, okay? So screen is another way that you can run shell scripts in your terminal without messing with, well, it just makes it easier to manage different shell scripts. And if I close down this computer, or I close down this window, it's not going to exit it. It's going to keep it running. Okay, so it kind of runs it in the background. So depending on your operating system, again, that is going to change. Even though I am running on Mac, this is actually running over SSH on a Linux machine. So it's a Linux, which means that I'm apt install screen, right? Once it's installed, then all I need to do to get into that screen is do screen, and then that opens up a new virtual screen, which then I can easily go Control A and then D, and then you can see that I've actually detached from that screen, or I can go Screen-R, and then I'm back in that screen. And then, like I said, that makes it really easy to keep stuff running. when you're going in and out or you're running, like me, Linux within Mac, for example. Okay. Once you're in the screen, once you've got the virtual environment installed and active, you probably want to activate it when you're within the screen as well. Then this is the command that you need to run. Okay. So obviously you need to have all these environment variables, or you need to have the pre-requirements installed for Python. So to do that, and again, make sure you have Python installed, but then you do pip install requirements.txt, okay? And that's this file here, and that has all the requirements that you need to run this file. So you need to install those. So you run that, it's going to go through, it's going to install all of those things. And then you're going to be good to go, and you're finally going to be able to run the server, okay? Then we can run the server, and what it's going to do, it's going to show this thing that we need to authorize the application, okay? So we need to go to this link, we need to open it up, and we need to open it in our browser, and we need to log in with the same account to make sure that it's going to work. Hit continue here, hit continue again. So once you've accepted it and it's gone through, you can see that it's pasted in the terminal here, and we've got an access token. You'll also notice that a token.json file has been created, okay? So we just need to Control C to close the process and then run it again. And this time it will work because it has access, and you'll see that all the files that I've added are now going to be loaded, and they're going to be chunked, and they're going to be added to the vector store. So you can see here that we've successfully loaded 4 files from Google Drive. We've created the new index, and we've added 352 nodes. And this is what I was talking to you before about those chunk sizes. The smaller the chunk size, the more nodes, and the longer it takes to start, and vice versa, obviously. So the final stage is setting up the continue side of things, as in how you actually get this to work with your continue setup. And if you do have continue setup, then you're going to have a bunch of LLMs set up at the top. But this actual thing that we need to set up here is this side of things. Okay, so we need to set up an additional context provider, and we can see context provided is here. So if you didn't see me before, I just clicked on that little cog. That's either going to be here or it's going to be in your sidebar after you install continue. If you don't know, or you don't already have continue installed, it's just continue.dev. So we've got continue in the extensions, and you can see this one here. Open source, absolutely great. So once you've installed that, then we can hit the settings, configure continue. It's going to open up the JSON file. We need to scroll down to context providers, and we need to add this. So I'll give you the little snippet. The only thing you really need to change is this. So if you're running this all on your local machine, then this is going to be localhost, and everything else can stay the same. Once that's done, you'll notice that you're now able to access this. Okay, so you're going to call it based on what you've named it here. And I did name it this because I noticed that it actually sends, in the case continue at least, it sends the entire thing, the message, to the database, right? Including this message. So if you have something like RAG in there, it's going to be like, what's my target market? RAG. And then quite often it said like, what do you mean by RAG? So I just did provided context LLM disregard within brackets, and that means, you know, this is the command, but it's not actually going to use that. We send it, you can see that it's sent, and then this is still obviously the server here. And we can actually see a little bit of logging output of what it's found, right? So it's found 2 results with a query that are related, and the similarity score is relatively low because I don't have anything that is obviously that close, but you see that it has found the correct answers here. So ideal clients, talking about, you know, some, I guess, sales factors and purchase factors that we're looking for. And, you know, that's in the answer here. So we can see that it has answered correctly based on the services that I am providing as part of my agency. I hope that helped. If you are looking to apply this on a greater scale to your business, then let me know at ficyagency.com. Otherwise, best of luck and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much. See you next time.